All right, guys, we are live with Beard of Darkness book reviews and the wonderful K.E. Andrews. How are you tonight, Katie?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Oh my gosh. So if it wasn't just the SPO, or if it wasn't just K's Hidden Shelf, I'm dropping things over here, and so many other booktubers, and I've just seen this wonderful cover and this beautiful title all over the place, and I said I have to have her on the show. I'm so excited to hear. So what's been going on today? Anything fun? Anything special?
It was just a day of work. So my coworker has been out of the state, so I've been working pretty much full time. I'm an office admin at an equine vet, so it's always something. And I was just worried today's storm would be a little bit detrimental to everything because something always happens. But luckily, it was a very quiet day, so I got some reading in between everything else. So really, nothing nothing much for a Tuesday, which is surprising. But
I have to say, the background looks like just the coziest little spot to find a little book, have some tea. Is that your
yes,
dig?
I love my
Is that your
plants.
jam?
Yes, I love tea. I love my plants. Just love the cozy vibes. I think it's called like cluttercore, so it's not hoarding.
Right.
It's just like a nice amount of stuff to make it feel lived in.
I
But
love it.
especially with the plants, it started with one, and now we're up to over 50, which is yeah,
That's
it's
really cool.
fun.
So, are you a perennial? Are you a succulent kind of person?
Actually, succulents kind of intimidate me. Like, they seem like they're very easy, but they're very easy to overwater. So I prefer actually tropical, surprisingly. Even those take a little bit more care. Pothos, super easy. I have a couple succulents that do really well, but I loved outdoor gardening over the last couple years, and then steadily it's moved inside. So
So,
it's
tell
just
everybody
plants
where
all
you're at.
around.
You're in
Um, oh, I am in Powder Springs, Georgia.
Georgia.
It's
So,
about 50 minutes from Atlanta.
okay. Oh my goodness. I can. So, I've driven through Atlanta many times, and I am on my way to Florida every one of those times. And you only miss that exit once to bypass Atlanta, just once. And you sit in that traffic long enough that one time that you're like, you know what? I'm awake when I am about to enter
Mhm.
Atlanta. So I love a good peach. I like a cold peach though. Put it in the fridge, peach
Yeah.
tea sometimes.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
but
We're actually known for our apples more, honestly.
I didn't know that.
Apple country up north, pretty much from September to November is everyone's going up there.
The prime apple season. That's funny.
Mhm.
I
You
live in
don't go in
Ohio.
October because all the
Sure.
apple orchards are busy, but very good cider.
Oh, so you yes, because right we live by a place called Jackson, Ohio,
Mhm.
which the water tower when you drive into this little town called Jackson, which is the Apple Center of Ohio, they call it. But yeah, the water tower is an apple,
Ooh.
so similar kind of thing going
Mhm.
on. I love that. I do love some cider though. I like, and every now and then, like the apple pie moonshine kind of thing. That's really good. Throw a
Mhm.
cinnamon stick in it and call it apple cider, right?
Yes.
But kind of back to why I love this. That's why I do lives because we can just talk about anything, right?
Oh,
This
of
is my
course.
show, and I have these wonderful guests. We can just go anywhere. But I would love to hear all about Hills of Heather and Bone. Let us know the subgenre, the blurb, the whole deal.
Okay. Well, I actually have the copy of the book here. I've been meaning, I keep forgetting each time. I'm like, oh, that's right. If there's no graphic for the book, I'm like, it's easier to show people.
Mhm.
So yeah, genre wise, I don't know. It's hard to kind of like pin it down because I call it cozy ish dark. But someone called it grim cozy. So
Oh,
I'm like, so overall, I would say it's a little bit, it's not grim dark and it's not dark fantasy, but it does have heavier moments. But overall, I consider it kind of cozy, which is very different from what I usually write, which is dark fantasy. Um, so yeah, this was my love letter basically just to kind of like plant magic and just like a little, well, a lot of necromancy. But I liked the two themes of, growth and death just kind of intermingled like that. So it basically is about a married couple who are on the run after being discovered. So the main character, Marana, she's what's called a bone weaver. So it's necromancy, but you don't really bring the person back. She's able to kind of hear the voices of those who have died in their bones. And so she can bring them back for a time being, but there's like no spirit or soul in there. And so her form of magic is considered taboo. And people in this world who have magic are called blood gifted. And her husband Percy is what's called a root sower, so he does plant magic, and he's also a flesh mender who does just a lot of healing on bodies and stuff. So again, that kind of dynamic that was really fun. And yeah, so they're just trying to be on the run, trying to find a safe place, really. And there's a chicken, the spiteful chicken that's there. I love adding that in because it's so unexpected, but it was so much fun to write.
What was the
So
secret question I was going to throw in? I'm glad you got it though. Yeah, I hear Kay talks about this chicken, right? And I'm just like, what's this chicken?
it's my main selling point.
There you go.
I'm like, what's the weirdest thing I can tell people besides the plant puns, which were also very fun to write? Yeah, it's a Scottish inspired world, kind of 1600s ish, if I had to give a vibe, but not really specifically based like that, but definitely a lot of fun to write. So
I like those inspirations. Again, like I said, especially Kay's channel. She just it's one of those that I've just known. Like, if I want to hear more about it, she's got lovely things to talk
I
about.
love Kay.
She's got a great channel, right?
She does.
It's wonderful, and I'm sure she'll pop in here. I feel like she will. She usually is here during, and especially having here. But I just wanted to say real quick, some shout outs. Christopher Brand, my guy. Hail, my man. Timothy Wolf, man. I'm telling you, if there's like that, him and John Douglas, and we got Tim McKay here, of course, Book Mama, my wife. Just like, you've got those certain people who are just like in your corner. Isn't that so cool? I'm sure you've got those. I mean, Kay first, and that's the only, I'm sure there's many more. But isn't it just so cool? It's part of that community, this writing community.
Even people I haven't met who show up. I love it.
Yes, it's so cool. My man, Ryan Skeffington, thank you for being here, brother. JP Anderson, yo, right back at you. My wife, Book Mama 87, is pumped up. I would get to this question. She's rushing me. It's all right. I'll forgive her. Let's see. Another lovely author, JP, or J. I said JP because I was a JP up here. J. Patricia Anderson, thank you for being here so much. She loves plants too. She's a plant lover.
Kay loves plants. We went on like a whole thing in a Discord once just about plants.
Who, you and Caden?
Oh, Kay.
Kay, yeah.
Sorry.
I love that. And she's up in Canada, so she's got snow. We were talking a little bit before we came on. We both love snow. She can relate with the succulent. She's only kept one alive. It's right, because with a plant, you want to be able to take care of it. To take care of it, you kind of have to water it, right? So maybe you just like, I'm not taking care of this plant enough. Let's water that bad boy. And let alone, you look the next couple of days, it's turning brown and withered on you. You've taken care of it a little too much. I understand it.
Sometimes you can just change the watering schedule just by a couple days, and it's like, I'm ready to die now. It's like, okay, great.
So Timothy, I know he's in New York now. Much different.
Marietta is a good area.
Yeah. Let's see here. J.C. Unburned, my guy, my very first sci-fi novel.
Happy birthday, Joe.
Oh, is it his birthday?
It is his birthday. I'm calling him out on it.
Happy birthday. He's not a day older than 26. I know this. And I love his witty writing style. Man, he just makes me laugh. He makes me think. It's wonderful. JCM, one of the very first guys to ever come on my channel too. Like, I was nobody. He's like, yeah, man, I'll come on. Made my day, made my week.
Always then that's one less person I can add to the last question of the interview questions you sent me.
Oh, I'm going to have him back on. So that's still a good answer. 100%. In fact, it's been on my mind recently. JCM.
Especially for his new book. Yeah. Well,
yes.
Most recent one.
Yes, the dinosaur one. I can picture the
Yes,
cover. I just can't
partial
think of the
function.
name. Partial function. Yes. I love his witty way of telling a story, and I didn't think The Wistful could be so big in my mind. He changed my mind about sci-fi,
Space
which
Bears, game
Space
changer.
Bears. Oh man, there's one scene where they're like kind of mourning a death, and they're kind of just getting real tipsy together. It's
Mhm.
such a good scene. Yeah. So, what does it mean to you as an author to be one of 10 books left in the SPFBO this year?
It's still very weird. Because it's almost like, you've had this big gathering of people and now everyone else has gone home except for like a few of you who are just kind of hanging around, just waiting to see what happens. But the finalist chat is like really fun and supportive, and but all of Spiffo has been like really supportive the whole time. So being in the Spiffo discords is always cool. And so this is my second year being in Spiffo. I made semifinalists last year, which I go into the competition thinking, it'd be nice to win, but I'm going to set my expectation real low at I hope I get a review that's nice. And then anything else is a bonus. So last year, Thiago and I were in the same kind of grouping. And so it was just like, who's going to get it? And then Thiago gets it, which is really exciting. But also at the same time, you're like, oh, darn. But it's that
Sure.
weird dynamic of Spiffo again, where it's like, we're all a happy family here, but, we do kind of want to win. So it's weird. Um, but yeah, so I was again in a grouping that really didn't announce anything until like last minute. So it was October 29th that I got nominated for semifinalists. I was like, "Oh, that's really exciting, cool." And so, of course, I'm looking at the remaining books. I'm like, "Who's gonna get it?" I mean, like, those other books seem really cool. So, I'm happy to have made semifinalists again, and this will be my last one for, like, a while until I come up with something, you know? Yes, basically author survivor. Um, until I come up with something new. And then, I was also prepping for surgery the next day, so I was like, "Okay, semifinals is nice, I'll go into surgery the next day, just having something nice," and then it's the morning of my surgery, and people are texting me like, "Hey, congrats on making finalist." I'm like, "What? Am I dreaming? Like, I haven't eaten in 24 hours to prep for this thing. I don't know what's happening." And so then I saw the thing, and I was like, "Oh, it's real." And then, of course, I go into surgery, and so the rest of the week was just a weird blur of, "Is this real? Maybe." And then a couple weeks later, I got the coin, and I'm like, "Okay, that feels a little bit more real." So it's still very much like, "Oh, this is happening, and we are in 2024," even though I keep thinking it's 2023 part 2,
Yeah.
that, "Oh, yeah, it's still Spiffbo year." It's like, it still is, but new Spiffbo is coming up. Yes, Spiffbo might have saved
Theseus's
my
parent
life.
might have saved your life right there.
I had
I
something to
totally
live for.
so those coins, right? I see, Mark, post when he gets them in the mail and then he's about to send them out.
Mhm.
They've got to be, do they, I want to know how they feel.
It feels like a hockey puck, honestly. It's
Oh,
like, so it's not a thin thing, like, you could probably hurt someone with this, not saying you would, but honestly, it feels like air hockey puck, and I wasn't expecting it to be that heavy or that big. I was like, "Oh, maybe it's just like a thin little thing," and I'm like, "Oh, this has some weight to it." Like, there's probably some symbolism there, but we're not gonna dive into that.
so
Um,
yeah, it feels like it's substantial. Maybe I'm using it's like substantive. Is that the word?
mhm.
It's got some
Substantial,
substance.
substantive, yeah.
Substantial. Exactly. Yes. I love that. So I see them and they're so beautiful. I mean, uh, to me, and again, I'm really new. I'm like 5 years into reading fantasy, but it seems a lot like I'm pointing to my bookshelf. I know you guys can't see. This is me being delusional. I have a world, the Wheel of Time, kind of like I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's like the dragon with it eating its tail. I think that's so cool.
Mm.
I think it's a
It
beautiful
is,
looking
it's really
coin.
cool.
So because of the of Spiffbo, for me, we kind of talked a little bit about this before we come on. It was really something that gave me a list of people to chat with, right? Because I was intimidated, but like I was telling you a little bit before we came on, I said, who do I take seriously? Not that most booktubers I don't take serious, just
Mhm.
who do I really watch and I really just devour? And it was those who did interviews. I loved it. Loved watching interviews. what's better than reading a book and loving it, and then being able to see the personality or the inspirations or the journey that this author had on the way to writing that beloved book of yours. So I found myself, it was really popular when I came on. I think it was just announcing the semifinalists. So probably a little bit before they announced yours, obviously, because you only spent one day, right, as a semifinalist.
Yes, it was one day as semifinalist, and then we're like, we can't get any higher than this. And then, yeah, 2 days of real intense stuff.
There's people with whom I speak with every day, whether it's writing advice or just chatting and about life, and that came from Mark Lawrence's SPFBO, man. It just is so cool to me what he's done. It's such an influential thing. And I love that it's brought so many people together. So speaking of bringing people together, who are a couple of authors that you discovered because of this competition?
That's, how to name just a few. Well, Joe, for one, for sure. We were in SPFBO 8 2022. And I also met Andrew D. Meredith. He was the one who brought me onto Discords. I had no idea how to use Discords. I was just kind of free floating in Instagram realm, trying to figure out how to do author social media. And he was like, hey, we've got a Discord, which was at the time the India Chords, still is. So I got onto that one. And then once I entered SPFBO, it was like, oh, here's a whole other Discord. So just so many people. Yes, Andrew is definitely a solid dude. But yeah, so Joe, Andrew, I met Tori Tekken from Tori Talks through there, Chiago. There's so many authors, especially from that first year, because like some of them, I mean, not everyone rolls over into like the next Spiffo, but when you can start to meet other authors and see like reoccurring faces, it's really cool to just be like, hey, I know you from last year. So
yeah, it's one of those things where you kind of find a familiarity and you're in
Mhm.
it together, and there's like a friendship. This is what I see, of
Oh, yeah.
course. It's like the
Cal
friendship,
Black
and
was last year's too. Kat Rector, so many. T.A. Hernandez, yeah, so many names. I will try and remember them.
yeah, please, if you remember any, throw them out there as we go along. The baby's a little angry at the moment, but that'll pass.
Oh,
You know, a 3-month-old likes to cry when she's hungry, so
I
apologize about that.
understand. I do too sometimes.
Hey, me too. I'm usually just all tears. No, but so who are for not in, well, it can include anything. You're well. First, I'll ask this. Sorry, I'm kind of fumbling over my words. When
You're
did
good.
you discover your love for literature, reading, especially? Were you younger?
Yeah, so my elementary school had the accelerated reading program. So very early on, I'm trying to think, maybe I think it was like first or second grade is when I started really getting into reading. I was maybe third or fourth grade when I started Lord of the Rings. I definitely remember reading like the original, like Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, and Return of the King. I think The Hobbit was much later. Did Harry Potter, like a lot of the classics, like White Fang. Actually, Fall of the House of Usher. I don't know how that ended up in a fifth grade like a library, but that was there. So just like everything I could read, I tried to read. The Redwall series, especially, very
The fall of
monumental.
the wall. What was it? Usher? Well, I'm
Oh,
sorry,
The
I
Fall of
forget
the House of Usher by
who
Edgar
wrote
Allan
that.
Poe.
Edgar Allan
Oh,
Poe.
Edgar Allan
Okay.
Poe. Yeah. I loved it, mostly because the classic book that they had, it had pictures in it, and that was really cool too, just to see a lot of like reading and then get a cool kind of gothic picture. Because the Lord of the Rings books didn't have pictures, which would have been so good. Um,
Yeah.
and so yeah, very early on, I loved reading. My aunt used to read stories to me and my brother. So I kind of had that like excitement for creating stories and reading a lot. So pretty much elementary school was when I started really reading a lot. And fantasy was very early on.
So I love those foundational authors. That's always fun for me to hear because, well, a lot of them I still have to read. Like, for instance, a lot of Tolkien's work, a lot of, well, Edgar Allan Poe, who I've read some, like just in school. I don't remember really
Mhm.
following anything because, again, I did just didn't think myself as a reader in high school, and then that really changed afterwards when I found. Uh, well, there was a few foundational books for me. I don't know if you've ever heard of Ordinary Monsters by J.M. Miro.
I feel like I've heard of that. Is that the one that's got a raven on the front cover? Yes.
Yes,
Okay, I've seen that one. I've not picked it up.
it's so yes. You're not. Most people haven't, and he's a newer author. That's his very first class, his debut, and just for some reason, uh, I I was sick at the moment, and I just couldn't take those physical adventures. And I said, I'm going to try this thing out again. It was very appealing to me, and I'm so glad I did. That book, man, honestly, it brought me into it. It was so good. I don't know how I would feel reading it again. I feel like I'd still
Mhm.
love it just because it was like that book for me.
Yeah.
It's really it's a dark academia for adults. It's definitely not a Harry Potter thing. But it brought me in, and then I started reading James Rollins, which isn't he did some fantasy as James Clemens when he first started writing, but then I read James Rollins and some Stephen King, and just kind of fell into fantasy and really just took it all in. So I love hearing those foundational authors for you authors because most of them I get to read for the very first time, which I'm really excited about. So look over here. Sorry. So yes, I love some of those earlier novels and authors for you. How long have you personally been writing? And talk about how long it took for you to start and finish Hills of Heather and Bone.
Mm. So officially writing like for me didn't start till high school. I was toying around with fan fiction at like sixth grade, so I was about 13-ish at the time. So just writing a lot of fan fiction for a long time, and all throughout middle school, I was working on a book series that I thought would be really good. It was not, but I got like 8 books in, and then I think it was sophomore year of high school, I was like, this is not good," because 'cause I'd read a lot more and actually was like, "Okay, this is what it means to, like, write and tell a story." So I had shelved that novel series and started, Assassin and Grid Secrets, which is my dark fantasy one. So I had that pretty much sophomore year up until about 2021 when I published it. So I was working on that. Book 2 had been written somewhere at end of high school, middle of college. So that was, like, my first one I was gonna publish. But I ended up actually publishing some poetry, books around what was that, 2020? Yeah, so my first ever book, which was a poetry book, was 2020, which if you had asked high school me, I would have said, "What?" Because I didn't like poetry then. But then I took a class in college and was like, "Oh, I understand this. It's about feeling and getting people to understand things, in a very different way." So I really fell in love with that and kind of carried over like that descriptiveness and that kind of prose over into my fantasy. Just kind of seeing if that would do anything. With my dark fantasy series, I originally thought I was going to get a traditional publishing deal. I queried and everything, and then I was like, I'm not getting anywhere. So they had taught courses on like self-publishing, basically like it's not as hard as you think, but here are all the 20-ish steps of how to self-publish. So I kind of put that out of my mind because I'm like, that sounds expensive and difficult. And then I eventually was like, let's look into that because I like the creative freedom. I like being able to kind of write my own story without having to be like put into the industry standards of like this is what's selling, this is the word count you have to adhere to. So I was just like, okay, let's test that out. So originally in 2022, I was working on book 2 for my Assassin trilogy. And then I'd seen like someone mention something about like, oh, a necromancy couple. It was like a pretty little image. And I was like, huh, that sounds interesting. And so I started like outlining just an idea of like, what if there was a couple that was on the run? One of them's a necromancer, one of them has plant magic. Because I'd also been toying around with like a Hades and Persephone kind of mixed story where Hades is the woman and Persephone is the man, and it was just for some reason I liked the idea of like a really big buff woman and a really kind of petite kind of guy, just because you don't see that a whole lot. So I was like, huh, what can we do with this? And then I started Hills of Heather and Bone officially March of 2022, and then pretty much wrote that all of that year while trying to revise my second book, which is not advised because it's a lot of work. And then it was my NaNoWriMo project for 2022. And then I was like, okay, Spiffbo's coming around. I already entered Assassins in 2022. So let's maybe try and get this book done before Spiffbo. So literally, I think I published it a couple days before Spiffbo went live in May of last year. So pretty much Hills of Heather and Bone was an unexpected book. And that was the quickest I've ever written like a fantasy novel, because my first one took 10 years and this one took me maybe a year and a couple months. So it was a very fascinating project to work on, because
Yeah,
originally it was going to be a novella and then I overshot by 60,000 words. So I was like, okay,
that's
we're
quite the
doing full length.
overshot.
Yeah, I don't really
That's
know
half
how
a
to
book,
write.
people. Half a normal book.
It is. It is.
There's a few things. I love that build up. Okay, you've got things that, you've had a little experience, but then you find yourself getting this inspiration. You see a necromancer couple, and I like, honestly, it's one of the very first things I noticed about the cover is the woman is a little bit bigger than the man. I don't know why I noticed that. Maybe that's just
because I was trying to get people to notice. So there we go.
I love it. And but then, Tori popped in here, and I'm so glad she did. She says, y'all, if you have not read this beautiful lady's prose and descriptions, you are missing
Tori.
out. And her books are art pieces. I love that. And Caden, I've always loved this point about you. He talks about this a lot, and the wholesome married couples. Yeah, I think that there's not many. I don't know. There are many books with that in it, but I do. I like that idea. It's kind of what you would call traditional, I guess, but I find that it's at least in a lot of people's life. There's a lot of people that can relate with that. I can. I have a wife. I have kids, and I find that an attractive quality in a book. It tells a story, and then we've got. Well, here's Steve. There's chickens.
Yeah, Steve.
You guys just popped in here. She brought it up, but then I was like, you know what? You brought it up, but I was going to. I've heard so much about this wonderful chicken. What was it that I have chickens that we get their eggs, and it's a beautiful thing because I feel like a lot of I'd like to show my kids that you don't get your eggs from a store. They start
Farm
somewhere
fresh
else,
eggs
right?
are so good.
Yeah, and they're fun colors too.
Yes.
You guys only see white at the store. We've got all sorts of variations.
I've seen the blue ones. I've seen those fun green ones. So
yes,
pretty.
and speckled, some not. But the best part is you get to like tromp through their crap to get them, right? That's the.
Or if they hide them, or if they just like go lay it somewhere else. My uncle's chickens do that.
Yes, one of the behaviors I didn't really know, but makes total sense because nature can really be, and pardon my French, a real bitch sometimes. If they get really hungry, they'll eat those eggs.
I have a story about that.
Let's hear it.
Okay, so the chicken animal companion was inspired by, I mean, I've said this a couple times, I don't remember to who. There's a video or an Instagram account called The Useless Farm, and it's this woman who has these emus, and one of them's named Karen, and Karen keeps trying to kill her. Like, it just always attacks her because it doesn't like her. It likes her husband, but not her. So I was like, that's funny. And then I filed that away, and I was like, what if it was a chicken, which is definitely not as terrifying as an emu, but chickens to me can be real terrifying, because when I was in high school, I'd gone on a missions trip, and there was this chicken. I looked over, I was like, oh, it's a chicken, and then it was like eating one of its babies that was dead, and I was like, nature's scary. So I was forever changed by that, and so it's like, well, we'll not have that degree, but what if we just had the chicken that didn't like the main character but was really endearing to the other character? How do we have that dynamic of just this animal companion that's there? So that's how the chicken came.
I dig that. Totally. Thank you. You're really good at this too, because that was going to be like my next question is, where does that inspiration come from? And I like that it's based off of Mother Nature, which is very unforgiving, guys. It's not always. In fact, most of the times, it's not always flowers and unicorns when it comes to nature.
Yes.
You learn
Nature's
some
red in
brutal
tooth and
lessons.
claw. Tennyson
Yeah,
was right.
100%. So speaking of Kay's hidden shelf, she's here. I knew she would
Yay.
be. I told you. I said she will pop up in here. I know that.
Mhm.
Um, so thank you for popping up in here. We always appreciate you. And another thing about emus that differ with chickens is that spitting. They don't play. They will spit right in your eye.
No, no. They're
And
big.
and and they're huge. They will trample you. They're not fun. But it's funny because a lot of people around here where I live, which is Ohio, but the beginning of the Appalachian Mountains, lots of people for some reason have emus or
Hmm.
what's the other name for a very similar animal? Alpaca.
Oh, yes, I've seen
Um,
a lot of those around here.
yeah, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference just because I haven't really
Alpaca and
studied it.
llamas. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, llamas, alpacas, all that fun stuff. Emus, they're all similar to me, so I can't really tell the difference. But they have behaviors in which you would never really guess. They will spit at you, they will trample you, they'll run after you. They don't care. They really don't. So it's fun. I love to hear that inspiration. Those are always some of my favorite lines and bits of gold, if you will. I like to call it stuff that I really write down as those what inspired you. And I love that it started with Mother Nature. Um, Speaking of inspirations or maybe some of your favorite things, when you're reading, what are some tropes that you really, really enjoy reading? And after that, writing.
Um, so I really like kind of found family tropes. Those are fun. Um, gosh, I know the ones I don't like. I really like kind of darker characters that have maybe a little bit of a softer side. Characters that are funny. I really like funny characters and those kinds of tropes. Um, Certain romance tropes I do like, even though generically across the board, I'm like, insta love is out. But sometimes I'm like, oh, there's only one bed and they have to share it. Sometimes I'm like, if I really like the couple, I'm like, that's a fun trope. Or sometimes if they're awkward, but definitely like found family tropes, adventuring party tropes. I love that.
Ooh,
Um,
yes.
Gosh,
So I would
I'm trying to
also
think of
love
all
to
the
hear
ones.
ones that you don't love. I should have
Mhm.
added that to the question. Tell me some of them. Those are just like, ugh.
Yeah, definitely insta love and most, like, miscommunication tropes, unless it's, like, political, like, fantasy, political intrigue, but for, like, relationships and stuff, I'm like, "Just go talk to each other." Um, I'm not a huge fan of, like, total hopelessness, like, just grimdark. There are some really good grimdark books, but for me afterwards, I have to go take, like, a nap and contemplate everything, maybe watch some fun cat videos or something, because 'cause I'm like, "There's no hope to this." So, like, the dark with the light kind of trope where they're kind of playing off of each other, um, I do enjoy that. Um,
I
Gosh,
think
now
that
I'm
when
blanking
it
on all
comes
the
for me
tropes.
personally, like for a really grim book, right? So it's really bleak. There's not
Mhm.
a lot of hope going on. There has to be characters I'm rooting for.
Yeah.
Do you feel that way?
Yeah, there's unfortunately, though, with the track record of books I've liked, I'm like, "I really like this character," and then they're dead. So, I'm like, "Do I wanna love any of the characters?" Which again, if the author's making me love the characters and I know this character's gonna die, I'm like, "Okay, alright, fine." Really, I love snarky characters, which Joe does really well, um, but not being, like, overly mean. But if they have enough of, like, a personality, I really like them.
So are
So,
you a fan of Joe Abercrombie?
I've not read any of his books. I do have Half a King on my shelf somewhere, I think, and I really wanna start that one, but I've seen a bunch of people loving his book, so I'll do that because 'cause I've read Game of Thrones, so I'm like, I don't know, like, where on the dark, sad scale, that
Different
falls.
prose. It's funny. It's one of the very few authors I have a pretty good grasp on. He, as well as George R. R. Martin, who I really enjoy too, but more so Joe Abercrombie for me. You've mentioned snarky characters, dark characters, or kind of hopeless, but have like that human part of them, at least as
Mhm.
kind of, uh, yeah, Galacta. He's a torturer. Yes, Caden, my dude, coming through. 100%. You read my mind. He's funny. He makes me laugh very hard, and at times where it's probably the most inappropriate to laugh, but I can't help myself. Belly laughs. I'm not just talking a little giggle. This guy just makes me drop the book. I lose my spot. The bookmarks flown across the room. So I just from what you said, I think you'd really enjoy it. The First Law is
Okay.
what I'm speaking of. I haven't read past The First Law. I'm excited to.
I've
I
heard about
just
that one. So
yeah, it's good, and it's funny because a lot of so Joe Abercrombie's he's talked about a lot, and I would still consider him. I don't really know the word, but sometimes if so for Brandon Sanderson,
mhm.
I like what I've read, but I don't love it. And I think the more somebody talks about it, the more I'm waiting to kind of dive into his Stormlight archive, especially. I have the Way of Kings here,
I
and
do too.
I'm really excited to read it. But sometimes when an author's talked about a lot, for some reason in the trad world, it kind of pushes me away. I don't know why. But Joe Abercrombie is not that guy. He's somebody that I really fell in love with. His prose is very good, and just based off what you've said that you love, I think that's about probably because of my rookie status, the only one I could say that I would recommend. So it's good.
I definitely
Um,
liked Prince of Thorns, which was surprising because it is very I think it was my first introduction to, like, dark and grim fantasy, and I was like, "Huh, I really like this." And even though, the main character is so messed up, there was
he
something really
is.
endearing about that because that was just a morally gray character. That was the other trope I liked, morally gray characters. I might have said that
Yes.
already, but there's just something really cool about, like, a rogue character, um, that's, just they're they're a hot mess. Um, but,
Absolutely.
I like either seeing, like, their redemption story or depending on, how it's written, like, their de-evolution story, which can also be very fascinating.
Yeah. So for me, it's like, okay, for instance, Prince of Thorns. You start in these characters are their banter between one another are is very dark, guys. The stuff that they're doing, very dark.
Oh, yes.
But you find yourself there's that little grain of human that because of the contrast, I think, like there's all this dark, but then they show possibility for the light, and you're like, oh,
Mhm.
I think I'm rooting for that guy now. I don't know why he's done terrible things. At
It's
least
kinda
that's
like
how
the
I.
Hound in Game of Thrones. I was like, "Okay." I didn't like you in the beginning, but as we got at least in the TV show, just seeing, like, him kinda progress, I was like, "Aw, I'm sad that you're
Yeah.
gonna probably die."
Well, and you see like this tough guy face, and then all of a sudden something you're like, this guy doesn't have feelings, and all of a sudden he has those feelings, and you're like, oh, I can kind of relate with that, man. Now I really
Mhm.
feel bad for this guy because I had no idea he had those feelings, and now that he does, for some reason, I'm
Mhm.
rooting for him. I love that
Yes.
dynamic as well, and it was one of those tropes that I didn't see myself kind of anticipating to love, but I did. It's very influential.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
if you could, I think this is the first time I've asked this question. It just popped in my mind, and I think it's a good one. If you could co-author with anybody, who would you choose?
Oh,
And
it's
you
so
could choose
hard.
multiple.
I looked at that one, I was like, "I don't know." Um, let's see. There's so many authors. I would honestly say, like, Andrew D. Meredith and Tori Tekken, only because the writing styles are kind of similar to mine in terms of, like, descriptions, because I really love descriptions, and character-based, stories. Um, I don't know, Joe be really good with a lot of banter, and I'm not saying this just because 'cause they're in the chat, but, like,
No.
there's so many people. Be like,
Yeah,
"That'd be
it's a
so good."
super hard question.
'Cause I
And
never
and
thought about it, I'm like, "What who would wanna co-author with me? And how would I do this?" Um, but, yeah, I
I
think
see it in your
those
future.
people.
Somebody's gonna get a hold of you and be like, we should write a book together. And I think that would be cool. I think, it was one of those
There's so much pressure
aspects.
on that.
Yeah, it was one of those things that I didn't know happened really.
Mhm.
I was like, okay, there's one author per book. And then I read, well, I kind of bringing it back up, James Rollins and Rebecca Cantrell. They wrote the Order of the Sanguin series. It's about
Mm.
kind of like a priesthood of vampires. It's really good. And I couldn't tell going through the book when the prose would change. It was just, it flowed. And it was
That's
really
really
unexpected. So it was a new concept for me. It was a new like approach to writing books that I found very fascinating, and I still do. I think that people who take that venture to co-author, it's very brave, and I think that it
it
takes
is.
a lot of trust. And
It does, because you're working with a different person who's got their own ideas, and so you may clash on, like, characters, setting, how things need to be written, because especially authors have opinions.
sure,
And when you're solo authoring, at least you have beta readers who are maybe like, "Hmm, you should change that," and you can say, "Nah," or, "Maybe I should change that," whereas when you're actually compiling something with another person, it's like, we need to kinda listen to that, otherwise it's gonna not end up good."
yeah.
So
I think you make a really good point in saying that, especially, authoring books by yourself, knowing that side of it, speaking on the side of having to, well, not having to, but, taking part in that co-author relationship. I think that takes a lot of trust and a lot of open-mindedness and a whole bunch of other stuff. But I find it very fascinating. So one of the things that I'm zeroing in personally, I like to say this is a selfish question that I brought here for me, and I'm sure there's other people in this boat, but I asked it because of what I'm going through. And how did you find your writing process? So, what is your writing process? Like, you're really in the grind, you're writing a novel, and you make day to day writing goals. What is it? Are you a pantser outliner? And do you set limits? Kind of bring us into your process.
Um, so I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. Like I learned very early on in high school that I was actually a Terry Brooks book called Sometimes the Magic Works. So basically talking about outlining, because I hadn't outlined like the story I wrote in middle school. So afterwards I was like, what is this book even about? So when I went with Assassins, I was like, okay, we're gonna do kind of what people call a zero draft, but it's like very basic for me, where I write like this character is going to go do this and there's this kind of basic plot summary, and then I break it down by like the major kind of plot points. Sometimes I know character names, sometimes I know setting names, sometimes I know some of the subplots I want to add in, but usually it's just some sort of outline, which is what I take, which is what I call all my outlines. I'm like, it's some sort of outline for if I have a book title, I'll put it in. But usually it's just very generic, and sometimes it can be a couple pages long, sometimes it can be just paragraph, and I'll go off of that. But I usually always start with that before I start digging into the actual writing. Um, but I don't do anything like super in depth. I don't use like an Excel spreadsheet. I do use like a Scrivener program later on. Once I've had the book completely drafted, I'll go back in and break down each chapter by summary, what happens, major characters, major details for those characters, just so I have like an alpha list to go back to. So that's that. But as far as like how I write, I don't set like an amount unless I'm doing NaNoWriMo, and then I actually have a goal. Because some people are like, well, it needs to be 60K or it needs to be 120K. I'm just like, we're gonna kind of go with where the story's needing to go. Because I'll have like, beginning, middle, and end kind of mapped out. But sometimes it's called discovery writing. Uh, the plot will unfold where I'm like, "Oh, that's actually a really good idea that really either enhances the story or enhances this character," because I'm usually all about character-driven stories. So, I want there to be kind of a nice balance where it's not like, this is just solely plot and these characters just happen to be here. So, it's more of like a planter is kind of what they call it. So you plan for it, but then something else might come up, or it may
Hmm.
not work the way you want to, and you just kind of have to adjust according to either feedback or what you're seeing. So that's usually my process. I tend to write in order, but sometimes I'll have like a really good inspiration for like a section of dialogue. I'm like, that's really cool, that's really witty, and here's the conversation, and then I'll kind of stick that in somewhere, hope it maybe fits, and then write around it. So really, the process kind of changes for each book. I found, yeah,
No,
it's different, but I give myself like a little bit of leeway just depending on like what the book is. It's like if we need to write it in reverse, we can do that, or we need to start from beginning and move our way down so we can just see everything.
I have to say I've asked this question many, many times. Yours makes the most sense to me. It
I
does.
try. I mean, it makes sense to me.
And
So.
I'm saying that with all honesty. I've written down quite a few points that you just covered, and I've tried the pantsing, not for me, the baseline like skeleton of a story. I feel is more my deal, and then giving myself that creative freedom to fill in as I go and seeing where it goes. And I think that's kind of where I'm at. And I love that, man. It just made so much sense. I love that. You write in order sometimes, you write ahead based on dialogue, sometimes other things. I feel like in order for me personally to have that experience that I want to have, I have to know where I'm going generally, but be able to have the freedom of getting there. And
Yeah, I
I think
think, yeah, that's pretty much like the freedom to kind of just discover what I'm writing because sometimes I'm like, all right, this seems to be good, but then maybe there's a section in the middle that I'm like, maybe we need to go back. If I'm feeling stuck on a section, it's like probably I've heard it said before, like if you're stuck kind of where you are, the problem's a little bit further back. Um, so, and sometimes I'm just a mood writer. I'm like, I can't force myself to just write because then it's like I might end up hating what I like. So it's really kind of, I want to have consistency. So I try and do a little bit every day. But I'm like, I want to have the freedom to be like, if this is going to be a creative outlet day, then that's what it needs to be. Or,
I
we
love it.
need to brainstorm some more.
No,
But
I love
I
that.
mean,
And I go ahead. Sorry.
oh, I was just gonna say, I mean, that's the fun part of each book is like it's something new, and what worked for a different series is not necessarily going to work for this series. But roughly, like the things I always go back to is creating that outline and then creating like an alpha list afterwards. So when I go back and do my edits and revisions, that I'm like, okay, I remember this. This is a plot point. How does this carry through? Those are the things that usually tend to stay the same.
I absolutely love it. This is one of those I'm going to go back and I'm going to listen to you say that a million times. Because, yes, guys, I do that. If you've been on my show or going to be on my show, people like Caden and Ryan and Alex and Samoki, dude, anybody that writes, Steve, absolutely, Steve. David's been on my show. Yeah, I'll go back and just write those points down. So I not only do I enjoy hearing it, but it's helpful, and everybody's got something different to add, a different perspective, and they're all appreciated. I have to say the alpha list is something I just took very seriously that I hadn't really thought of before. I've been in that process, so I like to get all that before kind of having that question in the future.
Mm.
Summarizing each chapter, I can see how that could be helpful in so many ways.
I
And
actually learned that from a developmental editor friend of mine. So I had taken an editing class in college because I also thought I was going to do that because I was an English major. And they're always telling us, like, your jobs are valid. Just here are the creative ways if you don't want to go into teaching, which I didn't want to do. So when she had gone through my book and she gave me kind of a list of things, she even did page numbers of where they first occurred. So I was like, that's super helpful. And so I was like, okay, that is really, helpful to have the bare bones of who are the main characters, who are like, what are the settings, who are maybe some minor characters, side characters, things that
mm,
maybe reoccur with character dynamics, like are these siblings? Do they hate each other? Related? Whatever's going on. So I really liked that, and I kind of carried that over into like the rest of my writing, not only from like an editor's kind of perspective, but also just as a writer of like what's going to be really helpful for me. And keeping
sure,
track of the details because I have a lot of details. I'm like, we need to, even if it seems like obvious, like where are we? I'm like, we need to know the setting as opposed to maybe what month it is. That's a little more like
sure.
minutia.
Yeah, so that makes total sense. And I think that's great advice, especially, I mean, anything an editor is going to say, it's like I've only interviewed one, but it's very profound what they have to say. Like they do this every day. They read books, they read different people's books, they read different genres, different subgenres, and they have a good idea of what's going on. So if you can find a way to better write during that first draft, which is one of the things, do you find yourself first? I'll ask this, that first draft for you, is it like most people have told me, you aren't really worried about the grammar, you're not worried about everything being perfect, you just get it down?
I try, honestly. It's hard though because the editor side of me is like, "That's not right," but there's sometimes where I am in, like, a really good writing flow where I'm like, "We just gotta keep going. We know that word's misspelled. We'll go back and fix it later." Because one of my worst qualities is going back and editing the sections I've just written, which is why it takes a little bit slower. Because 'cause I'm like, "It needs to be perfect." So I'm starting to embrace more of, like, just really write trash, which, all first drafts are pretty much trash, but, like, really embrace that of, like, it doesn't have to be perfect, you can add in the details later, instead of, like, adding everything in now.
Sure.
So, that's kind of the hard thing for me, but, I mean, I've done it, or it's just, like, my brain's going so fast, I'm like, "I don't know, though, if there's a word missing, it seems to be right," until much later, so
Love it. Jim McCleary, I have some good news for you, my friend. He's one of my recent supporters, and he came up with a really good thing. Feel the beard. My
oh,
wife
that's cool.
finished your guys' shirts. I'm sending you and your wife those shirts. They're gonna be in the mail tomorrow. I got you, dude. It's gonna be fun, and I'm really excited. My wife's a graphic designer by day, like that's what she does. So
Fun.
I kind of got lucky, right? That's who did my logo. It
You
looks
make
so
all
much
your own
better,
merch.
dude. Yeah, dude, absolutely. But I love what you said. At first, I found myself writing this first draft, right, and starting it, and everything had to be perfect. And I just found out how kind of a waste. I don't know. I, I think what people have told me, such as what you just did, it's like get that first draft down. If you take the time to be a perfectionist, you will never get through that first draft. Tidy that bad boy up. I feel like Neil Gaiman said something really inspirational, and I'll try to remember it as somebody told me. It's like make your second draft look like, well, how was it? It was like your second draft is to something along these lines. Make it like you meant to do that. Like
Mhm.
I don't remember it word for word. It was great when I heard it, and now I'm just drawing a blank. Look it up, people. It's really profound. Believe me, I made it sound terrible, but it's great. It's kind of like get through
Mhm.
that first draft, make your second draft great, or your third, fourth, whatever it is, and
Yes.
make it seem like you knew what you were doing the whole time. Yes, thank you, Jim, my guy. Yeah. So some monkey dude, I think he said something like the second draft is for convincing people that you know what you were doing. Yes, that's
Yes.
absolutely along the lines. Um, Ryan, who, by the way, I'm reading his book Lost Souls, and it's wonderful. I'm almost done with it. It's so good. It's a sci-fi, and I never thought I'd be reading sci-fi. I
I
love
enjoy a good
sci-fi.
sci-fi. I haven't read
Yes.
many, but
100%. Your first draft is getting it on paper. Your second draft is trick them into thinking you knew what you were doing the whole time. I love it. That's it. Yes.
pretty
Um,
much. That's all writing is. Except for your alpha readers and sometimes your beta readers, like, I can see the progression, which is why whenever my writers group meets, I'm like, "Please." I mean, they're always nice and supportive, and none of these books would have gotten published without them, like, "This is crap," and sometimes it's just placeholders
well,
of,
that
like, "Go
sounds
back
like the
later."
perfect thing for an alpha and beta. Because look, I'm imagining giving that first rendition of your story to an alpha reader and then to a beta reader. You're really giving them the most vulnerable part of you, right? As an author, and you have to be able to trust those people. And I think that what you just said encompasses that 100%. Um, yeah, they're getting you through this process, and they're aiding you along this journey, and you're putting a lot of yourself into what you're doing as far as writing, and
Mhm.
then letting somebody witness that. That's very special.
Oh, yeah. So that's what I mean, I trust my writers group wholly since we've actually been together since college. So we were writing assistants at our college writing center. So we've they saw like Assassins like really in the early stages before I started making like hardcore changes to it. And so just, being supportive, but also willing to say like, hey, maybe this isn't working. Maybe this isn't coming off quite as, we'd like it, maybe it makes sense. And so just having like the differing opinions, but still kind of focused in on, we want to make this the best work that it can possibly be. So
Mm.
without like erasing your voice. So really, always it's always great when you have a writers group, because you can ask like those weird questions of, like how long does it take for a body to decompose? And, no one looks at
Yeah,
you weird and someone maybe knows the answer. Um,
sure. I can totally see that. And I find that that was one of the first, like having somebody maybe read a part of what I've written and like opening that to another person, it kind of takes a
mhm.
little build up, right? And takes a
Oh
little
yeah.
trust, takes a little talking back and forth and getting to know somebody. And I think that's an important part. Ryan says, how did you meet your writers group, Katie?
Yeah, so, college writing center, and the good thing about that is we kinda already knew how to give good feedback because a lot of critique partners and sometimes beta readers don't quite know how to give good feedback. Because 'cause I'd been in plenty of groups where people were like, "I hate this," and then didn't explain, so it's like, "Okay, you're fair in your opinion, but, like, how can you say this in maybe a constructive way?" Especially also an audience who is this writer of,
Mm.
if there's someone who doesn't take criticism well, how do you frame it in more of like a positive light, like, hey, this section really isn't doing it for me, maybe here's some suggestions, kind of having that mixture of like, here's what I like, here's what maybe isn't working, and not phrasing in a way of like, this is terrible, which was
Yeah.
also super helpful. And so we all learned that. Together, but we were also kind of, knowing, how would I feel if someone was coming at my work? And so that gave us, just a little bit more insight in how to give helpful feedback, but also encouraging feedback.
I think what you're saying to me is something somebody put to me about doing critical reviews of books. It's like, I have a really hard time if I don't like a book saying that. There's a way that you can do that kindly,
Hmm.
um, and give constructive criticism. And there's also a way that you could do it and say it in a mean way that doesn't
Yeah.
really help anybody. And I think being okay with yourself to give that constructive criticism in a kind way, not just being nice, right? Because you don't want to
Hmm.
fluff anything. You want to be constructive. You want to
Yeah.
help. You want to aid this process. And that's a happy medium that I think a lot of people struggle with. And I certainly did it first, for sure. And I think the more you do it, the more that you, especially one-on-one with an author
Hmm.
or a group like you're talking about, that just becomes a second nature. And if you're doing the best you can to be kind and be critical in a positive way, whether that is a book that you like or book that you don't like, it's one of those, traits and skills you grow over time. I love that. And I
And I
like how
think
you
that's
touched on
like
that.
it's a hard thing, definitely as like an author. It's like, how do I like to receive criticism? And then also as a reader, it's like I've always found in my writing classes, I'm like, there's always something you can find to like. And if you're choosing not to, then that kind of limits your scope, especially like if you're not able to put yourself in the shoes of another character. It's like you don't necessarily have to agree with that or have gone through those experiences, which again is where empathy kind of comes into. And that's, I think, why we enjoy reading is you can kind of live out those lives that maybe aren't similar to yours or characters who you'd be like, that was nothing I would ever do, but I can see where they're doing it, which again is a sign of good writing and being able to kind of give that helpful critique, especially in like maybe a book review of like, I can see where the author's coming from. It just didn't land well for me. But if you like this,
I
you
have
may
had
like
a Yes, I've had a negative review talk me into a book. So giving that constructive criticism is not always just this negative thing. Like, what you may not love about a book. I remember this one. I won't name names, but the review was like, in fact, it was my favorite indie read of 2023. This book was Trials of Ashmount by John Palladino. One of my good friends was like, it's just a little too dark for me. And I'm like, where can I get it?
it.
And I'm so glad I did, which is a perfect example of when you're honest in a critical way, in a good, kind way, but like constructive. That can talk people into that book because what you don't necessarily like, somebody else loves.
Hmm.
Um, Man, what a good point. I'm so glad we touched on that. Jim McCleary says, I need beta and alpha readers. Any ideas where to find them? What websites, etc.?
So in terms of like beta readers, I usually for alpha reading, I tend to keep that a little more closed because again, it's very early stages of the writing. So I tend to use my writers group who have been familiar with my works. They kind of know my process and they understand the fact like this is not this is not polished work. It's like we've got the cake ingredients in the bowl. We haven't quite mixed that correctly yet. But like, is this anything? Is this heading in a direction that makes sense? Beta readers, you can I've had good luck on Discords. So like the India Accord, Page Turners, and some other Discords where you can kind of do an open call of like, hey, I'm looking for some beta readers. This is what my story is about. Does this interest you? And I would always say kind of filter your beta readers because maybe you can ask questions like, how do you review books? Like, especially if they have like a Goodreads account, you can see how maybe they review books. And especially if you're like, if they're just going to hate on this book and not give constructive criticism, then, that's not the kind of help. Although
You
some people really
came
like that.
you
Me
came
personally, I'm like,
prepared.
yes, be prepared that each one's going to kind of offer different feedback. So Hills of Heather and Bone, I really opened up to some other people who I didn't know before and just was like, okay, I've seen you read other people's books in the community. Would you be able to like beta read this, especially if they've got experiences with things? So in Hills, there's some miscarriages that happen. The main character just struggles with mental health issues, and there's a lot of grief that's being experienced. And then also the fact that this is a married couple and I'm not married. So getting beta readers with some of those kind of similar backgrounds of like, hey, does this land well? Does this make sense? How can this be improved? I also use Tessa. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna say her last name right, and I feel so bad. But she helped me as a sensitivity reader, which was also my beta reader, because my main character has rheumatoid arthritis. So I wanted to say like, is this kind of on track for a character that's got a chronic illness? Is it too much? Is it too little? Is this, you know, as as realistic as we can be in a fantasy story? So you can be a little bit more particular with your beta readers of how are their input going to really help shape the story, confirm maybe some of the points you're doing well, give you some insight into stuff that is not quite going well. And sometimes it's hit or miss. But if you've had good experiences with beta readers before, you can always ask them, like, hey, if you liked this book, could you beta read this other book? But really, Discord and Instagram have been so far good. And I usually create a sign up sheet like, hey, just if this book sounds interesting. You can also do sample chapters. I've had that before where I've been a beta reader where instead of reading, a 700-page novel, you could read maybe their first 3 chapters and see like, hey, is this a good fit? Do you think I'd be able to contribute to this? But I think it kind of just depends on what you're writing, who you think your target audience is, because your beta readers aren't always going to be writers. It's always good to have like that reader's perspective as well, because they're going to be seeing it a lot different than you, who's like, well, back here on page 20, this line explains everything. And if they don't catch those details that maybe you're hoping, then maybe that could be an insight. So I always suggest alpha and beta readers for sure. And then your ARC readers. You can also be your beta readers if you choose to go that route.
So, guys, I've talked to a lot of authors, and I have to say, this is some of the best information I've gotten. This is in depth. This is helpful. This is constructive. I just have to say that this is great. I've never taken 2 pages of notes before. This is wonderful. So thank you
You're welcome. It's a
very
lot
much.
of learning experience for sure of just being really in the indie community and seeing how people have done things. And just like, what I wish I had done with my earlier books in terms of, more open beta readers, different beta readers. So it's all learning stuff that so far as I'm seeing it work out, I'm like, okay, good, that sounds good. Or it's advice from other writers. So there's luckily like enough of the community who's open. So if you like post a question like, where do I find beta readers? I've know plenty of people who are like, here's where you go, here are some websites, here's where you find sensitivity readers. Sometimes you have to pay for them. But like there's so many resources out there, which has been so helpful that I couldn't have found on my own. But
You're
there's a lot of
speaking
knowledgeable
from
people, thankfully.
speaking from experience is just the most honest way that I've found, that I hear, that I digest, that I understand, and you've been through it, and it's very helpful. JC on Burn, Kate, I think absolutely you should teach. Like,
And
this
see,
is
I
what you're
avoided
getting into.
teaching.
Well, I think you'd
I
be
could teach
really good
coding.
at
I
it.
think that's the only thing I could teach.
That's awesome. My man, Mike Molman, thank you for being here, man. I always love seeing your face pop up down here. Another SPFBO author. Wonderful, wonderful to see you. And Jim would absolutely sign up for that class. So would I. So that kind of leads into my next question, which you may have already said because you covered a lot. But the question was, what is one piece of advice you'd give somebody aspiring to be a self-published author?
Oh, geez. My top one is always, I mean, self-publishing is expensive. Um, there are ways to do things inexpensively without being cheap. And I would say don't be cheap, especially when it comes to your cover art and your editors. So my first book, there were some snafus with, I was like running out of money. So I'm like, I can't hire my usual proofreader who's several $1,000s. So I went for a cheaper option and that did not work out. So, and I paid for it in the end. But luckily I had a small enough audience to where I'm like, well, it's not going to, affect too many people. But definitely your editors and your cover artist. I would say if you're going to fork over money, those are where you should really fork over money. But there are Kickstarter options or crowdsourcing things, which seem to work really well. I've been lucky to, I don't know how I found my, oh no, I do know how I found my cover artist. She was on Tumblr. So I found her and I really liked her artwork for Dragon Age. And I was like, that's really cool. And she was affordable because she was
Shout her
very
out.
small. Oh, Jade May Yee. She's on Instagram.
Right.
Let me find, I think,
Jade
do I have
May.
it? She is amazing. She does
I think
really good
it's
work.
one of the most wonderful things authors can do is shout out their editors or their, because
Mhm,
for me, when I get to that point, it's gonna be like, who have I heard about?
mhm.
And
Yeah,
there's those names I've heard quite a bit. And
yeah, like Felix. It's like,
yeah.
"Oh, I'd love to afford that someday." But,
He's a
yeah,
busy
and
man.
then also being an English major, like, a lot of my editor friends who I'm like, "Okay, you do really good work, like, do you know of anyone else who does really good work?" Maybe at a little bit not, you know, cheaper rate because 'cause I'm like, "I know what you're worth, and you're worth every penny. I just don't have those pennies." So but the beauty of self-publishing is you can pick your own timeline for things. So if things take a little bit longer to get out, like, that's my other piece of advice is don't rush your book.
Mm,
Just because you wanna get it out, especially, like, if you're trying to put out sequels. Some people can really do that, like, they've had all their sequels written and edited so they can release them back to back, but sometimes what I've seen is just, like, if you're gonna rush something just to get it out, it better be really good.
mm.
Otherwise, if it's not as good as it can be, you'll have to do, like, edits again and then republish it, which can be good, but then you've also spent more money and time doing that. So, like a good bottle of wine, like, let it age a bit.
All
Like,
right.
it's
Look
good
at
to
that.
give it some time to
Analogies.
to ferment a little bit and, get to be the best it can be because ultimately that's what you want, and so, in the indie community, we have that time. We're not on a contract. We're not on, like the only ones we put pressure on is ourselves or when people are asking, "When's your second book coming out?" It's like, "I'll let you know when I know," which is
Yeah. Which it's funny you say that because you I talk to way more indie authors, but I talk to also traditionally published authors because they have wonderful advice to give also, guys. But it's that like collaboration of the two that gives such a good insight. And I have to just reiterate it again. You've really done a wonderful job with painting that picture. Because not that other advice isn't good, it's always wonderful.
Mhm.
Um, Maybe it's just me personally. Sometimes I understand one person over another, but a little bit better. But you've really broken down and given advice and parts of this process that I've heard somebody struggled, like a cover. You not the old phrase, don't judge a book by its cover. What do we all do? We judge every book, at least I do. I have to say for myself.
Oh,
I
I do the
judge a
same
book by its
thing.
cover.
Which is terrible
We are,
sometimes. But if Game of Thrones can sell a ton and that cover is plain, I'm like,
yeah,
sometimes you take that risk, but
sure, 100%. So I don't know, maybe I'm out of context with this. Katie, do you prefer reds or whites? I don't know what that means.
ooh, here's the thing: is as much as I prefer reds, but it's more on the sweeter side. I'm actually more of a Scotch person. And, but I do love wine because it's nice and
Yummy.
it's so old. I mean, they're all old world. But particularly it holds a special place for me because I spent study abroad in Italy in college. And so we were in the heart of wine country. I
Oh
just turned
yes.
21. I was like, okay, I mean, I'm legal here to drink, but I'm like, okay, I can go sample some things. And they're just like, here, come sample this in our vineyard. So I
Prosciutto.
enjoy good wine, but scotch is a little bit better.
All right. See, now me, Scotch, I'm too intimidated by it. I'm not a huge
I thought I would be too, but
yeah.
then I went to Scotland and I was like, "Okay, I can dig this." It all depends on the cask and it depends on how much it's aged, and also adding a hint of water really helps.
Look at that.
But it
Just
has
a
to be
little bit
scotch.
of
I can't do
everything.
rye whiskey. It's too much.
Yeah,
That
whiskey is a
burns.
definite no for
Ugh,
me.
no.
Absolutely. Now I have an open mind for Scotch. I will say that. I'll have to try that. I have to say I'm a red-blooded American. I like beer. I
I
like a
tried.
hard cider.
Hard ciders are good. See, my family drinks like really heavy beers and stouts, and
Hmm.
actually, surprisingly, it wasn't until I went to Italy that I actually found it was a pale ale. I think it was called Red Stripe. No,
Yeah,
wait, it was
that's
something. It
one.
was something. It was actually in an Irish pub in the heart of Rome, of all places. And I tried it, and my mom's like, "Who are you?" I'm like, "I don't know. I
You
actually
know,
like
people
this."
people would probably laugh. Like I don't. I like Bush Light. It's like the most
Favored. It's the
American.
favorite among horses, apparently. So.
I didn't know that. Yes,
You
you
can give it to
mentioned
horses so that they can sweat, and they love it because 'cause it's got all their favorite things in it, and they process alcohol really fast.
that is amazing. I love that. Oh my gosh, so many different aspects. You're very complex, Katie. You've got so many things to offer. This is wonderful. We have some good whiskey lovers here. We've got Killian's Irish Red, Mike Molman.
Mhm.
Uh, Samoki Dude likes a little whiskey. And
I did
IPAs,
buy the Irish
Alex.
or the Rider's Tear bottle just for the bottle. I did drink it. It took a long time, but
I know what you mean. IPAs, man, I've tried. I've really tried to kick that up and
certain
coming
ones.
scene of IPAs, brother. That just makes my whole face do this pucker thing. It's a little hoppy for me.
I mean, my
I
alcohol tolerance is very low, so Lagavulin good. It's very smoky. Not just because
Ooh,
Nick Offerman and Parks and Rec talked about it all the time, so I was like, I need to try it. But
Cincinnati, that's really close to me. It's like hour and a half, 2 hours away from me. Has a really popular IPA brewery. God, I can't think of their name, but they do all sorts of fun things. And I've just tried. I've really tried. It's just not for me. I like a light. I also
mhm.
like the darker, like Guinness. I like Guinness.
I like
I
the
can do a
smell of
Guinness.
Guinness. I just don't it's just so heavy to
It
me.
is. It is very heavy. It's like one of those like time and place one.
Mhm.
It's good for a time and place. If I'm in an Irish
Yes.
pub, absolutely. If I'm at home talking to an author, nah, it's a little heavy for me.
Mhm.
But that's so cool, man. I love seeing all these comments of just all the fun things that we all enjoy. I don't often get into that kind of stuff. It's so cool to see.
Like you said,
So
on live interviews, it can go anywhere, and this
yes,
is not the strangest one, like, little side trail I've gone on, but it's certainly fun.
they can. Yeah, it's one of the things. And I've had people like, "Hey, can we do a recorded one?" It's like, if that's the only way we'll talk, absolutely, we'll do that. I really strongly urge you to try it alive. And so far, I haven't had to do any recorded ones. So much fun doing these live. It shows the human side of us. We get
Mhm.
distracted. We talk about the main thing, but then we've got these other side ventures. You wouldn't do that in a recorded video. At least, probably most people would edit that out. Not me.
Mhm.
You get the whole package with Beard of Darkness. Bell too, my guy Brian Bell. Thank you for stopping in, man. out of time, but we'll watch the whole show. Oh, thank you so much. Talk about a great new channel. Oh my gosh. This guy got 100 subscribers in the time that it took me to get. Oh my gosh. The guy's just doing a wonderful job. Keep doing it, man. I love watching your videos. He has a very unique flavor to his channel. He does things in a really fun way. Anybody who isn't subscribed to him should absolutely do that immediately after this, right? So what are you working on currently, and what is next for you?
So it's going on almost 2 years now of like hardcore revisions for book 2, in the Grinning Assassins trilogy, which is called The Woman of Steel and Scars. The reason it's taking so long is just because life keeps happening. I wrote a whole separate book on the side. And the revisions that are taking place. So this book has not been touched since before the first book got published. So all that was in there was like before I added in a ton of stuff to book 1. So now I have to go back, make sure it all like makes sense. And then once this set of revisions is done and my writers group looks over it, I got to go back over those and then get it ready for beta readers. So the goal is to get it out by end of year. Hopefully. I already have the cover and everything. I got to work on that. And then I'm trying to write a fantasy Western novella that I've been working on for quite some time. Almost finished it for NaNoWriMo, but not quite. So hopefully that'll be the short thing I can put out maybe in the fall, and then book 2 of this series will be done. And then I can go back to book 3's draft. That is a hot mess.
Well,
I
love that. I'll tell you what I love to hear. And it's, you've got a book. Well, you've got multiple books that I'm excited to read. I haven't finished my 2024 schedule yet, but Hills of Heather and Bone is absolutely on that list. I cannot wait to get to it. It's one that I've heard so much about. And so there's something. So Crystal Matar is the first grim, dark fantasy romance that was like, you know what?
I need to read her book. I
need to read that. And I'm going to have to say, you have that same interest in my head. You talked about it being
That's
like
high praise. I don't think I deserve that, but
well, you talk about it being a cozy, grim, dark, or like a grim. How did you?
Someone in a review had it was either Mark Lawrence or someone else based off of Mark Lawrence's review had said it was like cozy grim, only because it deals with like a lot of grief, a lot of like a lot of trauma and stuff. But there are all those like cozy moments, cottagecore moments, and things I tried to make like cozy. So it was like these characters aren't miserable the whole time.
I mean, that sounds so much fun to me. And it's in the same realm as, like I said, when I heard about Crystal's books, it's like, these are something that I find to be explained to me from multiple people to be very unique, and I'm very excited to experience that. So are you reading anything currently? Are you in the middle of a read?
Yes. Yeah. That's also the reason that writing takes so long is because I am very much a mood reader. So, like, again, Spiffo has not helped my
Yeah.
TBR. Goodreads mocks me each time. It's like, you want to read 3,000 books. And I'm like, yeah, I do. And then when I do the math, I'm like, oh, so it'll take me about 60 plus years to get through this, assuming no one else puts out any great books, which we all know is never going to happen because indie authors and other authors in general are always going to put out amazing stuff that looks good. So I'm currently reading technically 5 books at the moment. I'll pull up my list real quick.
Throw it up. I'm very much in the same mood reading category.
So I'm going to start Upon a Burning Throne, which is my first chunky book of the year. It's about 670 pages. It's kind of in the same vein as Sons of Darkness, where it's Indian mythology inspired. So I'm really excited to read that one because it's been on my chart for a bit. There's an anthology by the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Writers Alliance, which is another good Discord I'm a part of. They're putting out an anthology on Monday of this month. It's called Verses, so it's kind of got some fantasy stories and some sci-fi stories, and I think it's about like people versus other things in the world, like society, other kind of things, and I'm almost done with it. It's really good. Traders We Are by Michael Roberti. I'm almost done with that. So I was trying to go through Spiffo, new and old. So I was doing this past year Spiffo and then other ones that I was like, we'll do that. And then it kind of tapered off because I was like, there's too many books.
You and me both, Ryan.
And then Murder at Spindle Manor. So I'm trying to read through all the finalists as well. Almost there. And then Undead Samurai by Baptiste Wu. Trying to almost done with that one. So
it's very good.
Slowly but surely.
It's fun. So I just started that. Yeah, I just started Undead Samurai like 2 days ago. But yeah, I'm the same way. Like, I'll tell you my favorite author, I would have to say, if someone was like, who's your favorite fantasy author? John Gwynne. I'm a huge John Gwynne fan.
I really liked Shadow of the Gods.
Oh yes, I'm reading Hunger of the Gods.
I want to read the second one, and then I just forgot to.
Listen, I'm on page like 100, and I feel like I started it 5 minutes ago. He's one of those guys that has a prose like nobody else. He just
dynamic characters. The story's engaging, even though it's long. I'm like, I really like this.
It's so good. So I love to hear that there's other people who are diving into 4 or 5 books at once, because that's how I am. Just depending on the day, that's where I go, and that's what I enjoy, and that's what I think I'll always do. Somebody asked Jim McCleary. He will be on the 12th. I think at 3 p.m. Eastern. I have to check. Get back with you. But yeah. That's going to be fun. I'm excited to, it's been a real treat hearing about all of these different writing process points that you've given me, because I keep looking at this list, and there's a lot of them I put this way, the way that you said it, and it makes so much sense to me. So, when you get that bit of information, that maybe you've been looking for, but you didn't know what it was or what it looked like. I've found quite a few of those. So I wanted to thank you. Tell everybody where you are most active as far as social media, so everybody can follow what you're doing, and where to buy your books.
Mm-hmm. So I am mostly active on Instagram and formerly known as Twitter, at KE Andrews. Trying to think. I do have a Facebook page as well, but everything pretty much goes through Instagram onto there. And what was the other part of the question? Oh, where to buy my books.
Yep, where to get your books, yep.
So they can mostly be found on Amazon, but they are through Ingram Spark. So if you are outside the US, just search through your online bookstore, and they usually should come up. If you're in Georgia, there are a couple bookstores that actually do sell them in store. The Crazy Book Lady up in Ackworth, if you're a Cobb County person, and then at Marietta, the Reading Attic at the Square. So those are the physical locations, but everything else can be found online.
I love you've got some smaller bookstores that you're talking
about.
I
love the smaller bookstores. Yes. They're just so much fun.
They are. I'd say I have one local here, but it's kind of like they hold, they're not really the fantasy holding bookstores. In order to get that, like, I've got to go to Columbus. They've got one here called oh my gosh, the Book Loft is what it's called. Ooh, and it is cool. A like 3-story. You've got a basement, a main floor, and a second floor, and I promise you will get lost. You will. There's so many nooks and crannies. Kind of lost. So cool.
Oh, I forgot. Silverstones also has Hills of Heather and Bone and The Assassin of Grimson Secret. I don't think they have the hardcover in stock yet, but I think he said, like, if there's something that's not in store, you can order through bookshop.org.
I just found Christopher Rocchio's second book, Howling Dark, and he was like the only store that had it. I got the last copy. Sorry, guys.
Kevin does really good stuff. The man. Yes. And if you have the chance to go visit the physical store, I definitely want to make a trip. I don't know.
Oh, yes. That's quite a bit of traveling for you and I. But yeah, if I'm ever there, it's Colorado, Utah?
Nebraska.
I knew it was over there.
I think it's Plymouth, somewhere. Nebraska. I'm not 100% sure.
I know he's like west, right?
Yeah, somewhere that way.
So if I'm ever out that way,
I know where
I would,
California is, and everything else is Ohio, somewhere in the Midwest.
yeah, we're up by Michigan North, but yes, this if I'm ever out there, I'll take pictures and we'll have a fun time. And yes, Portsmouth,
Portsmouth.
Nebraska. Bert, of
Okay.
course, Bert knows. Congratulations,
I knew
Bert.
it
By the
started with
way,
P. I don't know why I was thinking Plymouth.
no, that makes sense. But Bert just joined We Before We Go blog with Beth
Oh,
Tapler.
congrats.
Yeah, man, just a great addition to an already wonderful team over there. So, man, that's so awesome. I think you're perfect for the job. You're the man. But lastly, I would just like to thank you. Well, I have one more question. Who are some
Okay.
people you'd like to see me chat with in the future?
Well, I was gonna say Joe, but you've already seen Joe, but you can always interview Joe again.
I will.
Andrew D. Meredith, if you haven't. I'm trying to remember who you've had on the show because I've only been following a short time.
No, there's a
Um,
lot. I don't expect anybody to remember.
Definitely Tori Tecking because with her new book that came out, really good, epic fantasy, um, beautiful story. There is Amber Gabriel. She wrote
Ooh,
Crack in the Rock, so it's kind of a desert fantasy kind of thing. She does middle grade books, and it's more of like a clean kind of fantasy. She also does like these really cool sword pictures, and she lives out in Texas, and so it's just beautiful. I
yeah.
actually, my calendar back there is from her. I don't think you can
Oh,
see it,
that's so
but
cool.
yeah, she has a bunch of swords, and I don't know how we got connected, but she's been just like such a great supporter of me and just such a great writer. So I think more people need to read her books.
Well, I'll reach out to her for sure. And I've got I've had Andrew on, but he'll be on again, and then Tori I have coming up real soon.
Okay,
So
see?
that will be awesome.
Oh, Cal Black, if you haven't forgotten
Ooh,
Cal Black on there, because she writes, fantasy western, and then also did a novella for that's horror Lovecraftian-esque, which I didn't think I would like, but I really liked it. Because horror is not my genre usually, but there's some horror writers out there that are really good.
awesome. I will. I have not talked with Cal Black, so that's awesome. Thank you for those suggestions. Lastly, I would just like to thank you for letting me borrow you and your wonderful advice, your wonderful experience, your inspirations, your process, all that fun stuff that I'm going to rewatch a million times. And yeah, thank you. Thank everybody who came live
Yes,
and
thank you.
everybody that's going to come in the future as well, because there's going to be so many people who watch this live or in the future as well. It's just been a really fun hour and a half. Can you believe that? It's been 90 minutes. Doesn't
I know,
ever
I'm
seem
like,
like it.
"Wow."
So again, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Katie. I will absolutely ask you back. This has been wonderful.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad some things were coherent.
Of course, of course. So tomorrow, I am 1 second. I always forget because I have a mush brain. I believe it's Johanna. No, no, no. Sean Speakman, I believe, is tomorrow from Grim Oak Press. Um, I will make sure to put that on my Twitter. Thank you, Ryan. Like, share, subscribe, because that's always a wonderful thing. That's what we got to do here on the YouTube platform to grow. So if you guys could do that, that would be absolutely wonderful. Again, thank you, everybody, and we will see you tomorrow.